Millionaire saw his black maid sleeping on the street. What he did next shocked everyone. The rain was pounding the Seattle streets like bullets that October night when tech billionaire Fred Morales made a discovery that would shatter everything he believed about his own family. A figure huddled against a dumpster behind the Four Seasons Hotel, covered in soggy newspaper, completely motionless in the freezing rain. At first, Fred almost drove past. Almost. But something about the woman's posture, the way she was curled up, made him stop dead in his tracks. He whined down the window, and what he saw next made his blood run cold. It was Keisha Temple. The same woman who had been cleaning his $12 million mansion for 12 years. The same woman who had raised his daughter Mana since she was 4 years old. The same woman he trusted with his most precious possessions, now lying unconscious on the street like discarded trash. Fred's mind was racing. This was Keisha Temple, the most reliable person he knew. She had never missed a single day of work in 12 years. Never. And here she was, soaking wet, clutching what looked like a hospital bracelet, barely breathing on the filthy pavement of downtown Seattle. For a moment Fred hesitated. His ex-wife Victoria had always warned him about getting too involved with the help. His lawyer had told him to maintain professional boundaries, especially during his brutal custody battle. His reputation, his image, his carefully constructed life as Seattle's most philanthropic tech CEO, it could all be at risk if he was seen helping a homeless black woman at midnight. But this wasn't just any homeless woman. This was Keisha. The woman who had held his daughter when she cried. Who had cooked thousands of meals for his family. Who knew every secret of his household. If you're ready to hear a story that will change how you see wealth, power, and racism in America, hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next will shock you to your core. Fred came down in that cold rain and gently shook Keisha's shoulder. When she didn't respond, he called 911 immediately. As the ambulance sirens grew louder, one question burned in his mind. How does a woman who's worked for the same family for 12 years end up unconscious on the street? But first, let me ask you this. If you saw someone you knew sleeping on the street, would you stop to help? Or would you worry about what others might think? Leave your answer in the comments below. To understand what happened that night, you need to know who Fred Morales really was. And trust me, his story will make what comes next even more shocking. Fred Morales wasn't born into wealth. At 8 years old, he was living in a cramped foster home in Tacoma, Washington, after both his parents died in a car crash. No family, no money, no connections. Just a kid with a brilliant mind and an unbreakable determination to never be powerless again. By 25, he had built Morales Technologies from his garage into a $2 billion artificial intelligence empire. 2,000 employees, offices in 12 countries. His face appeared on the cover of Forbes magazine 3 times. Fred Morales had become everything he dreamed of as that scared 8-year-old boy. He lived in a $12 million mansion in Bellevue, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Washington, Italian marble floors, a wine cellar worth more than most people's houses, and a garage filled with supercars. But Fred's real obsession wasn't money. It was control. Control over his image, his reputation, his legacy. See, Fred prided himself on being different from other billionaires. He donated millions to racial justice causes. He hired diversity consultants. He spoke at conferences about equality in tech. Fred Morales genuinely believed he was colorblind, that he saw people for who they were, not what they looked like. But there was one massive crack in Fred's perfect life. His marriage to Victoria, a Seattle socialite from old money, had imploded in the most vicious divorce you can imagine. They were now locked in a brutal custody battle over their 16-year-old daughter Mana. And Victoria was playing dirty. She had unlimited resources, connected lawyers, and she knew exactly how to destroy Fred's carefully crafted reputation. The one constant through all of this chaos was Keisha Temple. For 12 years since Mana was just 4 years old, Keisha had been the backbone of the Morales household. When Fred was traveling the world building his empire, Keisha was there. When Victoria was too busy with charity galas and shopping trips, Keisha was there. When little Mana needed someone to help with homework, pack her lunch, or just listen to her problems, Keisha was always there. But who was Keisha Temple, really? Let me tell you about a woman whose strength will astound you. Keisha was 47 years old, originally from Atlanta, Georgia. 15 years ago, she had moved to Seattle as a young widow after her husband Maxwell was killed in a military deployment in Afghanistan. She was left alone with 2 small children and a heart full of grief. But Keisha Temple was not the kind of woman who gave up. Her son Jamal was now 19, a pre-med student at the University of Washington with dreams of becoming a surgeon, just like his father had wanted to be. Her daughter Alicia was 14, an honor roll student who spent her free time in debate club and volunteered at legal aid clinics because she wanted to become a civil rights lawyer. Keisha was incredibly proud of her children, but that pride came at a cost. She worked over 60 hours every week, Monday through Friday at Fred's mansion, then weekends catering events across Seattle. Every dollar she earned went toward her children's futures, and a secret that would break your heart. She had been quietly sending money to Georgia to support her elderly mother who was battling diabetes and couldn't afford her medications. In 12 years, Keisha had never missed a single day of work. Not when she had the flu, not when Alicia broke her arm, not even when her mother was hospitalized. She was known throughout Fred's social circle as the woman with exceptional integrity, someone you could trust with your life. And Mana? Keisha protected that girl like she was her own daughter. So when Fred found Keisha unconscious on that Seattle street, his world didn't just tilt. It completely shattered. The ambulance rushed Keisha to Seattle General Hospital, where Fred immediately paid for a private room. When she finally woke up 3 hours later, Keisha was confused, disoriented, and absolutely mortified. She kept trying to get out of bed, insisting she had to get home, that she had work in the morning. That's when the doctor delivered news that made Fred's stomach drop: severe exhaustion, malnutrition, untreated diabetes that was dangerously close to putting her in a coma. The woman who had taken care of his family for over a decade had been slowly dying, and Fred had never noticed. Through tears that she tried desperately to hide, Keisha told Fred the truth. She hadn't eaten a real meal in 3 days. She had been evicted from her apartment 2 weeks ago and had been sleeping in her 15-year-old Honda Civic ever since. But yesterday, even that was gone. The car had been repossessed, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and nowhere to go. Fred was stunned. How was this possible? He paid Keisha well, didn't he? She had been with his family for 12 years. She was practically family. How could she be homeless? But what came next would haunt Fred forever. Keisha grabbed his arm with trembling hands and begged him, pleaded with him, not to tell his ex-wife Victoria about any of this. She was terrified, absolutely terrified, that Victoria would fire her if she found out. Fred promised to help, promised that everything would be okay. But Keisha's reaction to that promise told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't just about money or housing. Keisha was afraid of something much deeper, something that would soon expose the ugly truth about Fred's own family. What Fred was about to discover would force him to confront a horrifying reality. Sometimes the people closest to you are capable of the most devastating betrayal. Over the next few days, as Keisha recovered in that hospital room, Fred finally heard the truth that would destroy everything he thought he knew about his marriage, his ex-wife, and himself. Keisha had been living paycheck to paycheck for the past 2 years, despite working for the same family for 12 years. But how was that possible? Fred thought he had been paying her well. What he didn't know was that Victoria had been systematically cutting Keisha's hours and reducing her pay. Little by little, month by month. It started small. Victoria would tell Keisha they didn't need her on Fridays anymore. Then Thursdays became half-days. Weekend catering jobs that Victoria used to recommend to her friends suddenly dried up. Keisha's income had been slashed by almost 40% over 2 years, but she never complained. She never said a word. But the financial devastation was just the beginning. 6 months ago, Victoria had accused Keisha of stealing Mana's diamond earrings worth $15,000. Victoria threatened to call the police, to press charges, to destroy Keisha's reputation forever. Keisha begged and pleaded her innocence, but Victoria made it clear. One more incident, and she would make sure Keisha never worked in Seattle again. The earrings mysteriously reappeared a week later in Victoria's jewelry box, but the damage was done. Keisha lived in constant fear, walking on eggshells, terrified that any small mistake would end her career and destroy her children's futures. Meanwhile, Keisha's elderly mother in Georgia had been diagnosed with cancer. The medical bills were crushing. Every spare dollar Keisha earned went toward her mother's chemotherapy treatments and insulin. She was sending almost $1,000 a month to Georgia while trying to survive on what little Victoria left her. The consequences were devastating. Jamal, her brilliant 19-year-old son, who had dreamed of becoming a surgeon since he was 8 years old, had to drop out of the University of Washington. He couldn't afford tuition anymore. Instead of studying pre-med, he was working construction 12 hours a day, his hands bleeding, his dreams shattered. 14-year-old Alicia, the honor student who wanted to become a civil rights lawyer, was staying with neighbors because Keisha was too ashamed to tell her own daughter that they were homeless. Imagine the pride and pain of a mother who would rather have her child think she abandoned her than know the truth about their poverty. But here's what made Fred's blood boil. Victoria hadn't just been cutting Keisha's pay out of financial necessity. She had been systematically sabotaging Keisha because she saw her as a bad influence on Mana. Victoria believed that Keisha was getting too close to Mana, that she was filling her daughter's head with the wrong ideas about race, about justice, about treating people with dignity regardless of their skin color. In that hospital room, as Keisha broke down completely, Fred witnessed the most heartbreaking conflict imaginable. Here was a woman whose pride had carried her through 15 years as a single mother, who had never asked for help, who had worked herself to the bone to provide for her family, and now she was forced to choose between her dignity and her survival. If you can't believe what you're hearing, make sure you're subscribed, because what Fred discovered next will make you question everything you thought you knew about people you trust. Fred left that hospital with his mind racing. Something didn't add up. He went straight home and did something he should have done years ago. He reviewed the household financial records that Victoria had always managed. What he found made him sick to his stomach. Victoria had been systematically reducing Keisha's pay, but she had been telling Fred that Keisha was getting raises. The money Fred thought was going to Keisha had been going directly into Victoria's personal account. For 2 years, Victoria had been stealing from both her husband and her employee. But that was just the beginning. Fred found Victoria's text messages to her wealthy friends, and what he read made his hands shake with rage. Message after message mocking the help. Calling Keisha uppity for asking about her reduced hours, laughing about how these people always think they deserve more than they're worth. Then Fred found something that changed everything. Security footage from his own home that he had never bothered to review. There was Victoria, clear as day, planting Mana's diamond earrings in Keisha's purse. Then, an hour later, there was Victoria discovering the earrings and accusing Keisha of theft. It had all been planned. All been calculated. All been designed to destroy a good woman's reputation and life. But the moment that broke Fred's heart was when his 16-year-old daughter Mana finally told him the truth she had been carrying for months. She had overheard Victoria on the phone with her lawyer, calling Keisha every racial slur you can imagine. Victoria had been planning to get rid of that woman for over a year, and she didn't care who got hurt in the process. Fred realized something that made him question everything about himself. His own willful blindness had enabled this abuse. He had been so focused on his business, his reputation, his custody battle, that he had handed over complete control of his household to a woman who was systematically destroying an innocent family. The worst part? Victoria's lawyer was already using Keisha's fake theft record in their custody proceedings. They were arguing that Fred had poor judgment in household management, that he couldn't be trusted to protect Mana if he couldn't even protect his own valuables from dishonest employees. Fred knew he had to act, but his own lawyer delivered devastating news. Exposing Victoria's racism and fraud could completely destroy his custody case. Victoria's family had unlimited resources and political connections. If Fred went to war with them, he might lose Mana forever. That's when Fred made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He secretly met with Keisha's children, Jamal and Alicia, and learned the full extent of their family's struggles. Jamal showed him his bleeding hands from construction work. Alicia showed him the homework she was doing by candlelight because the neighbors couldn't afford to keep their electricity on late. Fred hired the best private investigator in Seattle, and what they discovered was even worse than he imagined. Victoria had a pattern of discriminating against black service workers. Their previous nanny, Maria, had been fired after Victoria accused her of inappropriate behavior with Mana. Their gardener, Thomas, had been let go after Victoria claimed he was intimidating the neighbors. Victoria's own personal assistant, a brilliant young woman named Jasmine, had quit after Victoria made her life so miserable that she moved to another state. All of them were people of color. All of them had been systematically destroyed by Victoria's calculated racism. Fred's lawyer warned him one final time, pursuing this could cost him everything. His custody case, his reputation, potentially even his business if Victoria's family decided to retaliate. But then Mana came to her father with tears streaming down her face. She begged him to help Keisha and revealed something that made Fred's decision inevitable. Victoria had been threatening Mana for months, telling her that if she ever discussed family business with her father, she would make sure Mana never saw Keisha again. A 16-year-old girl was being psychologically manipulated to stay silent, while a woman who loved her like a mother was being destroyed. Here's my question for you. If helping someone you cared about meant risking everything you had worked for, would you do it? Let me know in the comments. Fred faced the ultimate moral test: protect his own interests or fight for justice, knowing it could cost him his daughter, his fortune, and his future. What he decided to do next would shock everyone who thought they knew him. The custody mediation was scheduled for the following week. Fred had 7 days to plan the confrontation that would either save Keisha's life or destroy his own. The morning of the custody hearing, Fred Morales walked into that Seattle courthouse carrying a folder that would change everything. But he wasn't just carrying evidence, he was carrying Keisha Temple with him, along with character witnesses that would turn a simple custody dispute into a trial about racial justice in America. Fred's own lawyer begged him not to do this. His legal team warned him that what he was about to do would absolutely destroy his custody case. But Fred had made his choice. Some things were more important than winning. The hearing started normally enough. Victoria sat at her table looking every inch the perfect socialite mother, surrounded by 3 high-powered attorneys who had been preparing for months to paint Fred as an unfit father. She smiled confidently, probably thinking this would be the day she finally destroyed her ex-husband once and for all. Then Fred stood up and did something no one expected. He called Keisha Temple as his first witness. The room went silent. Victoria's face went white. Her lawyers started whispering frantically among themselves. What was Fred doing? This was supposed to be about custody, not about household staff. Fred opened his evidence folder and began methodically destroying his ex-wife's life. First, he presented the security footage, crystal clear video of Victoria planting those diamond earrings in Keisha's purse, then discovering them an hour later. The judge watched in stunned silence as a wealthy white woman deliberately framed her black employee for theft. Next came the financial records. 2 years of systematic pay cuts, while Victoria told Fred that Keisha was getting raises. Thousands of dollars were stolen from both Keisha's salary and Fred's household budget, money that went directly into Victoria's personal shopping accounts. But the text messages were what really set the courtroom on fire. Fred read them out loud, one by one. Victoria calls Keisha uppity for asking about her reduced hours. Victoria tells her friends that these people always want handouts. Victoria laughed about how she was going to put that woman in her place. Victoria's lawyer immediately went on the attack, trying to discredit Keisha's character. He painted her as a disgruntled employee who was lying for money, a woman who had been caught stealing and was now seeking revenge. He questioned why she hadn't reported the alleged abuse earlier, suggesting that her story was fabricated. That's when Fred made the decision that would define the rest of his life. Instead of letting his lawyer handle the response, Fred stood up and publicly destroyed his own custody case by defending Keisha with a passion that shocked everyone in that courtroom. Fred told the judge about Keisha's 12 years of perfect service, about how she had raised his daughter when he was building his empire, about her son Jamal, who had to drop out of college because Victoria's financial abuse left the family destitute, about 14-year-old Alicia, who was staying with neighbors because her mother was too proud to admit they were homeless. Fred looked directly at Victoria and said something that made her physically recoil. "Your Honor, I have spent 12 years living with a racist, and I was too blind to see it. But I see it now, and I will not let this woman destroy another innocent family." Victoria's lawyers objected furiously, but the damage was done. Fred had just admitted that his household was managed by someone he was calling a racist. His custody case was over, and everyone in that room knew it. But then something happened that no one saw coming. 16-year-old Mana Morales asked to testify. Against her mother's desperate objections, against her lawyer's advice, Mana took the stand and told the truth that had been eating her alive for months. She testified about overhearing Victoria's racist phone calls, about the threats Victoria made if she ever told her father what was really happening, about watching Keisha, the woman who had been more of a mother to her than Victoria ever was, slowly disappear from their lives. Then Mana looked directly at the judge and said something that brought tears to grown men's eyes. "Your Honor, my mother taught me to hate people because of their skin color. My father is teaching me to love people because of their character. I choose to live with my father." That's when Victoria finally snapped. The careful facade she had maintained for months crumbled completely. In front of a packed courtroom, in front of court reporters and witnesses, Victoria launched into a racist tirade that revealed the depth of her hatred. She screamed about how Keisha had poisoned her daughter's mind, how these people were always trying to take advantage of generous white families, how she was tired of uppity black women who didn't know their place. The words that came out of Victoria's mouth were so vile, so filled with centuries of racial hatred, that even her own lawyers looked mortified. But the moment that would haunt them all forever was what happened next. In front of that entire courtroom, Fred Morales, tech billionaire, self-made millionaire, one of Seattle's most powerful men, got down on his knees in front of Keisha Temple and publicly apologized. He apologized for his blindness. He apologized for enabling 12 years of abuse. He apologized for living in a bubble of privilege while a woman who had sacrificed everything for his family was slowly destroyed by his own wife's racism. Fred's voice broke as he said, "Keisha, you gave my family everything, and we took everything from you. I am so sorry. I will spend the rest of my life making this right." The courtroom was dead silent, except for the sound of Keisha crying. Not tears of sadness, but tears of vindication. For the first time in 2 years, someone had publicly acknowledged her worth, her dignity, her humanity. Victoria's lawyers immediately requested a recess, knowing their client had just destroyed any chance of winning custody. But the damage went far beyond the courtroom. Court reporters were already filing their stories. Social media was exploding with leaked video from inside the hearing. Within hours, Victoria's racist breakdown would be national news. Fred had sacrificed his custody case to defend Keisha's honor. But what happened next would prove that sometimes doing the right thing brings rewards that money can't buy. The judge's decision would shock everyone, but the real transformation was just beginning. What Fred and Keisha built together in the aftermath of this confrontation would become a model for racial justice that inspired millions of people around the world. What happened next proved that sometimes when you risk everything to do what's right, the universe rewards you in ways you never imagined. The judge's decision came down 3 days later, and it shocked everyone in that Seattle courtroom. Despite Fred's lawyers' warnings that defending Keisha would destroy his custody case, the opposite happened. The judge awarded Fred full custody of Mana, stating that any parent who would sacrifice their own interests to defend an innocent person was exactly the kind of moral leadership a 16-year-old needed. But Victoria's consequences went far beyond losing custody. The court ordered her to pay back every dollar she had stolen from Keisha's wages, with interest. Her racist breakdown had been recorded and went viral across social media, destroying her reputation in Seattle's social circles forever. Her own family's law firm quietly asked her to step down from their charitable foundation boards. Victoria had gotten exactly what she deserved. But the real transformation was just beginning. Fred didn't just give Keisha her job back. He promoted her to household manager with full benefits, a company car, and something that would change her life forever: an ownership stake in Morales Technologies. Keisha Temple, the woman who had been sleeping on the street just weeks before, was now a millionaire. Jamal's college tuition was fully funded, not just for his undergraduate degree, but for medical school too. That brilliant young man who had been working construction with bleeding hands was back in pre-med classes within a month, his dream of becoming a surgeon alive again. 14-year-old Alicia received a full academic scholarship that Fred personally established, guaranteeing her path to law school and her dream of becoming a civil rights attorney. The little girl who had been doing homework by candlelight was now planning to change the world. But Fred's transformation went even deeper. He used his wealth and influence to establish something unprecedented: a legal clinic, specifically for domestic workers who had faced discrimination. The clinic provided free legal representation, job placement services, and emergency financial assistance. Within 6 months, they had helped over 300 families across Washington state. Here's the twist that nobody saw coming. Keisha didn't just become Fred's employee or even his friend. She became his business partner in the most important venture of his life. Together, they launched the Morales Temple Foundation, a social justice initiative that would revolutionize how domestic workers are treated across America. They created the first-ever certification program for ethical household management, established emergency housing for service workers in crisis, and lobbied for legislation protecting domestic employees from discrimination and wage theft. Keisha, with her lived experience and unshakable integrity, became the moral compass of a movement that would help millions of families. Fred, with his resources and business expertise, became the engine that made it all possible. They were partners in every sense of the word, equal voices in a company that put human dignity above profit. But the most beautiful transformation was personal. Fred, Mana, Keisha, Jamal, and Alicia became something more powerful than a traditional family. They became a chosen family bound by love, respect, and shared values. Mana found in Keisha's children the siblings she never had. Jamal and Alicia found in Fred a father figure who supported their dreams without trying to replace their deceased father's memory. Keisha found in Fred not an employer, but a true partner who valued her wisdom and strength. They spent holidays together, celebrated graduations together, and supported each other through every challenge life brought. The mansion that had once been a symbol of wealth and isolation became a home filled with laughter, debate, and genuine connection. Fred learned something that his business school professors never taught him. True wealth isn't measured in dollars or stock prices. It's measured in the dignity you show others, the justice you fight for, and the love you build with people who matter. 3 years later, when Jamal graduated from medical school, when Alicia won her first debate tournament, when the Morales Temple Foundation helped its 10,000th family, Fred realized that finding Keisha on that rainy Seattle street was the luckiest moment of his life. Not because he got to play hero, but because she taught him what it really means to be human. The foundation they built together now operates in 12 states, has helped over 50,000 domestic workers, and has changed legislation protecting service employees across the country. But more importantly, it has changed how families think about the people who work in their homes. Keisha often speaks at universities and conferences now, telling her story not for sympathy, but to challenge people to examine their own biases. She asks audiences the same question I'm going to ask you. How many people in your life are struggling in silence while you assume everything is fine? Fred's story proves that privilege isn't something to be ashamed of. It's something to be used responsibly. When you have power, you have the obligation to use it for people who don't. If you enjoyed this story, Like, subscribe, and share with others so they can learn too. See you in our next video.